Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and if I see another gun, it'll be too soon. Guess I'll stay away from my vault for a bit. I've been poring over flavor texts, quest dialogues, scans, and other relevant data for the past few days now, and I think it's time to get this into a format I can understand and try to make sense of. Today we're going to be talking about the weapon Foundries, both new and old, their relevance to the city, and what they do for us as Guardians. Some of you may be asking what relevance they have for us in the lore world. My answer would be simply that they're a window into the city, a look into what we don't generally get to see as Guardians up on our high wall. I was pretty excited when we dropped down into the city and were able to go through it before fighting Gaul. I was admittedly hoping to see more of that space used again, so here's to hoping we can in the future for some reason, just to even walk around, you know? For me, I've always been fascinated by war stories, but more for the people involved, how they thought, what drove them, what they did that impacted certain elements of conflict, how those decisions played out and affected those around them. I've always hated things like troop movement or just knowing how formations rolled around on a battle, but to know how war affected people and the way things changed due to it has always grabbed my interest. The Foundries do directly connect with our Guardians in a lot of ways, supplying us with equipment either on or off the field. Foundries conduct research on Golden Age technology and try to adapt it to our everyday lives, or they work on new methods to push technology in different directions. Or both. There's always both. We'll start with Daito, one that's been seen often while you level up, but not so much when you end up hitting the level cap and start grinding those legendaries. They have one major weapon that they are associated with over the course of Destiny, and that's the Jade Rabbit. It's been a while since we've looked over that Grimoire card, so let's take a look at it, huh? What kind of harebrained scheme have you got in mind this time? Like many weapons of the Dark Age, the Jade Rabbit was created from hastily reassembled and often poorly understood Golden Age technology. In this case, kinetic low-atmosphere propulsion systems in use on Luna settlements. Even the weapon's casing is cut from the plasteel bulwarks of the First Light installation. The significance of the markings, Jade Rabbit, are unfortunately lost to history. As much as many will focus here for the Jade Rabbit, it's here above the thumbhole on the grip that we see the Daito logo. Is this just some kind of leftovers from the weapon's original parts, or did Daito grab this thing and modify it? Daito has been around for a very long time. If you head back to Mars in Destiny and head to the Buried City, you'll find their logo on a large billboard overlooking the middle structure. This, of course, throws in the question of how long they've been around and who's in charge of them, but we can make some decent conjecture and speculation about them. It very well may be that they were some kind of branch of Clovis Bray, being that the Bray family largely controlled and inhabited Freehold City, and they may have been one of the only branches to survive the collapse. Even if not, however, and they were some kind of startup company back in the day, I do find it odd that in the new tower we find a room filled with Daito logos, and on a table we see a journal belonging to the late Anna Bray. For me, if my thoughts hold any weight or truth, Daito could be one of the last remnants of Clovis Bray. We know of a couple Brays that have existed past the collapse, one being Anna, who may have died at the Battle of Twilight Gap, and Elsie Bray, whom was the designer of the Eon Trespass, before she disappeared. After this, we don't have any other information on the Bray family's involvements in the City Age, so what we're left with are questions like these. To me, it seems like the writing is literally on the wall. But who knows? We've heard from the president of Daito from the exotic ship Takenomi Wings, made in honor of the Takenomi Rangers. I have something more important to tie this ship and its text back to later on, but it's important to know they are very much a functioning entity within the ship's lore tab and possibly within Destiny 2 proper. Another note, there's this logo that hangs all over the tower on either boxes or outside and above the city vault. I've always just associated this logo with Daito, but that was just my brain doing a thing. The logoing with this split line always seems to immediately associate with, me at least, the Daito lettering from the billboard. My subconscious, however, might be onto something with an old logo from the Age of Triumph called Having It All. It isn't the logo itself, but what's in the gray that I want to point out. Daito's logo is this typical diamond fashion, and again, I see similar imagery here, right down to the spot in the middle. Again, my brain's probably just doing a thing, but I found it interesting nonetheless. This could have major implication for what Daito is really doing, where it could be operating as a bit of a shell company for this major company that we have no name for. They're seen all over the place, and just as Clovis Bray did before in the Golden Age, they want to have it all. Just fun connections with dangerous implications. Well, that's one Foundry down. Thankfully, not all of them are that in-depth, but let's move on. Perhaps the ones that are most well-known are Suros, Haki, and AMAlon. All of them were heavily introduced over the Taken King, and they've followed along for the ride into Destiny 2. We'll focus on these three next. We'll start with Haki, the guys that made one of my favorite auto rifles in Destiny, the Zaranea D. This rifle saw me through quite a few good times. Great memories. And perhaps that's the funny part about Haki. Their designs are more about nostalgia and based on function over form, as they claim in their mission statement. Hammers, not scalpels. Relatable design harkening back to a lost era. Haki is not about exciting form, it is about exciting function. A weapon's weapon. Haki is the instrument of the people. A typical Haki rifle or sidearm is covered in generally low amounts of color, with gray being the base, but an orange stripe being the only thing of general denotation that stands out about any of their weapons at first glance. Still, they were commonly grabbed up by Siva and used as base weapons for its ability to consume, enhance, replicate. Haki likes to name their weapons after powerful men and women of history, with the Siva equivalent weapons following suit from the stories of the originals. For instance, Judith D is named after Judith from the Bible, or quite possibly could be. The quick summary is Israel was in trouble, and many of them feared what was to come from war. Researchers today believe Persia was to blame for the threat on Israel, for a side reference. Anyway, Judith got a little ticked off with her fellow countrymen. She entered the camp of the enemy, beheaded their leader, and returned to her people with the head of the possibly Persian leader. The gun's initial name, Judith D, possibly refers back to the woman that existed millennia ago, but the name that Siva gives it, called Fever and Remedy, I feel backs that up. The people were in a state of panic within the story of Judith, but after beheading the leader, she had found the remedy, quickly watching as the attacking force was lost and dispersed. So the story goes. Anyway, like Haki itself, there's a brief history lesson. Still, aside from their philosophy on their manufacturing techniques and goals, there isn't much known about them. We know that Banshee works close with them on occasion, but this isn't atypical for most of the Foundries working with the Star Weaponsmith, as you'll soon see as we progress on with the other Foundries. They may also have been around a good bit before the city formed, or something similar in terms of looks thanks to the Zavala trailer, but it's missing that signature orange stripe, or at least I can't make it out too easily. We used a lot of salvage gear from the Golden Age, don't forget. Kabastov, anyone? Anyway, let's move on to Suros. These guys are arguably the most robust and comma-defined weapon maker in the world of Destiny, and it's seemingly due to how they dip into every possible walk of weapon-making life out there. They're majorly popular for their old auto rifle of the same name, the Suros regime. Nostalgia as a weapon of war. Style as a hallmark of victory. Suros engineers developed the regime using recovered Golden Age schematics. Forced out of production by a crippling shortage of smart matter, the few remaining models are cherished by those Guardians fortunate enough to wield them. Just to follow up right away with their creed. This is my sword. Function is a given. It must be given form. Design is honed. Precision. Every curve, every line, every chamber speaks to the Suros philosophy. Suros is elegance amidst brutality. Suros generally goes for the look versus the overall function of their weapons. Due to this, they tend to follow a different set of perks, design traits, and overall motivations for the weapons that they create. This is roughly shown with the nature of how they've molded and altered their weapon names over Destiny to Destiny 2. Originally, Suros weapons held a 3-letter designation. This designation seems to always lead back to a current-day company, like one here in 2017, laced back to their small identifier code on the New York Stock Exchange, shorthand for a current airport, and other small references. Nothing too big stands out from them until you get into Destiny 2, where they've started to make their philosophy more fit their names. Elegy 49, Minuet 42, Pentatonic 48, the list goes on. It feels they may have gotten this idea from Siva itself, especially considering the name of the rocket launcher from Rise of Iron, called Sound and Fury, lacing these musical connotations to their weapons to continue with their creed of design is honed, just like a musical piece. Added, music plays a very big part with Destiny, especially with dealing with a certain cranky Russian. Past this, they seem to try and reach out to every avenue of the city, being within Eververse packs, being a good bulk of Shaxx Crucible stock found out in the world fairly commonly. They just seem to creep up from time to time in ways that large companies often do. Not much is known of their founder or their works, but I'd imagine that they're all very proud of the work that they do, with each weapon making sure to hold the tagline of Suros one way or another, either in the flavor text or the name of the equipment itself. Their standard colors are also red and white, a scheme that is even psychologically there to catch the eye. Still, the ones that always catch my eye are AMAlon. You can basically relate AMAlon to the Apple of the City Age, except they seem like they're actually upgrading their equipment instead of calling it an upgrade. You know what you do, Apple. Before I make this into a rant about a crappy company, let's talk about liquid ammo. Something extremely unique to AMAlon is what they fire. Perhaps how they fire is pretty well the same as usual, just pull the trigger and let the thing do its work. But it's what they fire that matters. AMAlon has a few of these different fire options, with one of my favorite weapons of theirs being Hardlight. Still, I'm talking about the guns here again instead of what we should be, which is what this foundry actually does around the city. Before I get too far ahead of myself, however, this is AMAlon's philosophy. Experimental, bordering on irresponsible. Powered by barely understood technology. A fusion of the mad scientist and product engineer of the new frontier. Hallmark is the liquid ammo displays and AMAlon power cells. AMAlon is the future returned. AMAlon are businessmen first before they are anything else. You can tell this in every little piece of flavor text that they have, just to highlight a few. Tonella SR4. Hell will freeze over before the AMAlon Tonella SR4 will fail you. Thesson FR4. Hasten the dawn with the new AMAlon Thesson FR4. Ufern HC4. AMAlon's Ufern HC4 sentences the city's enemies to burn. They love to call their name out in every weapon that they have, or almost do, and I kinda like that they do. I mean, it made searching for them in the database a little easier. but it does always make sure you know their guns. That being said though, they don't seem like they do an awful lot for the city as a whole. In fact, I'd almost argue the total opposite, at least from a face value of their design philosophy, especially the bit about experimental bordering on irresponsible. However, aside from some rather fun dialogue that we have on the new Hardlight, I haven't dug up a bunch about AMAlon. Speaking of Hardlight, it fires a type of hard polymer, not a bullet. That's why it can bounce. I can reference that they're very loyal to the city. The Vanguard doesn't like using their weapons, Shaxx does, and Future War Cult has always been a fan of theirs, suggesting a type of involvement with them. But that's about all I've got. To those interested in the naming scheme for AMAlon, they also follow a lot of powerful deities from old world history and myth. The one Siva weapon that really screams out to this is called Chaos Dogma. But let's move on. There are a few foundries that don't have a ton of details, but they are responsible for some very big weapons that are out there. We'll blaze through these as best we can. Crux Lamar. These guys are mostly known for their rocket launchers. In fact, that's all they've made. Faisal Crux and Victor Lamar seem to be around during the time of the Iron Lords, making rocket launchers with the design purpose of beauty in destruction. Speaking of, that's the name of the mission we learn a bit more about them in Rise of Iron, and it's also where we get our Yellow Horns back. On a small tangent, it feels like the time placement for these two is a little off. Originally, Gjallarhorn was made from the leftover armor of Guardians at the Battle of Twilight Gap, a battle that happened in defense of the city, a time after the Iron Lords were really around due to the First Siva Crisis. Or so we think, anyway. Faisal, however, talks about the Iron Lords using Gjallarhorn. I'll let you decide. The Gjallarhorn shoulder-mounted rocket system was forged from the armor of Guardians who fell at the Twilight Gap. Gifted to the survivors of that terrible battle, the Gjallarhorn is seen as a symbol of honor and survival. The Wolfpack round was a statement, and it said all the Iron Lords would ever need to stay on the battlefield. Crux. I suppose it's not to say they didn't make two versions of the launcher, but it does send up a red flag to me for consistency. Could be a miss. All the same, Crux Lamar is a little questionable of whether they're still around. The new version of the Gjallarhorn, after all, was kit-bashed with Siva by Shiro 4 in Rise of Iron. All the same, they seem like one of the older Foundries that were around, making the Dragon's Breath and Truth launchers as well. They also could be the ones that founded the idea of the weapons Foundries, which wouldn't surprise me too much. So much for quick. Okay, another one that was around in Rise of Iron is called Nadir. Nadir has produced a few weapons, but not much is known about them. Their biggest make was Nemesis Star. I just realized I made a whole episode on this gun and never actually produced it. If you guys want to hear about that one, let me know below. It's very spacey. But back on topic, Nadir, like that of AMAlon, seems to deal in different forces of delivery in their weapons. Nemesis Star's rounds, for instance, would start off fast and then slow down with increased projectile speed and damage. Around the city, however, they aren't very well known, and the Nemesis Star Grimoire card states just as much. It's not really worth a read, I just summed it up. Keeping with rather unknown Foundries, Veist is brand new to us in the city. This is the thing about the Foundries, there's a lot of them that creep up and fall off just from standard business practices. Veist, however, seems like they've been designing weapons for a fair bit of time, focusing mostly on energy-based weapons. In fact, that's basically what their guns are. Just to gush a bit about their weapon designs, I love them so much. The thing that jumps out at me about all of them is the magazine, all of them being related to a type of battery it almost looks. Where AMAlon mostly focuses on liquid and converting that into a bullet, Veist literally takes energy from a type of battery cell and converts that into something more physical. You're shooting a lightsaber every time you fire one. Though that noise would get kind of annoying after a while. I don't know why we keep getting gun montages all over the place. There's something seriously wrong with the editor here. Anyway, not a ton is known about them, minus what we have on flavor text for the weapons. We know they're the newest and youngest foundry in the city. We know they also like to name all of their weapons after things that have some kind of poison or venom in them, and from a science standpoint, their weapons are aptly appropriate. Venom from a snake or bee or otherwise is generally a transference of a type of energy from the one that applies that venom. In some cases, this venom transference can take a lot out of the holder, kind of similar to a gun running out of bullets to fire, or in Veist's case, enough energy in the power cell to convert into fireable form. The only other obvious call out to them is that they're the only ones that make the linear fusion rifle that we have for the moment, giving an old design feel to that of Sleeper's Simulant from Destiny. Makes me wonder if they picked up on that design, or that's just what happened from their energy cell technology. That's sadly all we have on Veist for the time being, or at least that I was able to pick up on. I'm anxious to hear from them and maybe one day get an exotic weapon from them to boot, but for now, all we know is they're new and they like things with poison. You know, when you say it out loud, it just doesn't sound good. As another small side note to pan back to real life, the energy cell always kind of reminds me of the P90 magazine. I know it's not necessarily the same thing because it's more embedded in the gun, but it just feels like it with that cylinder style. Anyway, just a small call out. Before we dig into the last major one, there are two other foundries, or at least possible ones, worth talking about. Cassoid is one known for being on a very signature weapon of a certain Vanguard member, Ikora and her Invective. Past this, Cassoid is seen on a few other weapons, but not much is known of the Foundry, or even if they're making newer equipment. Nothing even points to them being a Foundry relevant in the city age today, or even if they were. They could have been around for commissions or only a few select deals before closing shop. Like most things done by an artist, it could have been a once-and-done sort of deal, making a masterpiece and leaving it be. Moving on, this next one is more just seeing common weapons pop up. Some could claim Mida is one, and that's possibly not far off. We'd have to know more of this alternative timeline that they speak of in the lore tab, though. Unless it's literally just supposed to reference Marathon. Well, this one's up in the air, and it's more just a common name that we see in Destiny. Trax seems like a common model with multiple versions, which makes me think that they may have been a foundry that focused on scout rifles. Just to rattle off a few names. Trax Calum 1, Trax Calum 2, Trax Calum 2A, Trax Malus 3, Trax Onus 3, Trax Devotio 3, and a few others. Regardless, Trax is a common name, and it makes me wonder if that's significant or not. Well, that's 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's all of them minus one more, and I'll try to stay on point on the topic as best I can. This story happens at high noon, like any good shootout would, with one man walking away with something to prove and the other dead on the ground in ash for the curses that he strung together against those he once swore to protect. I am of course referring to Shin Malfur and Dretchen Yor, a story that carries on to explain why the last word has such crazy history within the tower. Sadly, the story of the weapon was much more involved in the tales of the weapon's maker, Tex Mechanica. Tex is a pretty straightforward foundry. They focus on making weapons that look even older than Haki's gear does, from a time before modern firearms were born. They generally look and sound like original revolvers would, all of their gear being a bit more exotic over the rest. I mean, that's actually kind of literal. They only make exotics, aside from a few blue hand cannons from the original Destiny found mainly in the Crucible. Even then, a lot of those were placed in the loot table before Dark Below, so says several databases. Anyway, within the city, Tex Mechanica seems to push for a lot of bribes for these weapons and the research they do. They push for their products being a very unique look and feel, harkening back to an old-fashioned time filled with uncertainty and strife. You know what? This is already a long episode. Let's read a really funny old grimoire card that's really frickin' long. What was that? Nothing. We're secure. We'd better be. Calm down. Whole district's been deserted ever since the Gap. Nobody's here, except us. Why'd he make us come out here? Secrecy. I don't know. He's our man on the inside. So we humor him. It's just the quiet making you jump. Help me get this screen set up? It feels criminal. I got word from the consensus says it's not. You know what I mean. Maybe it's not against any law, but it's messing with the tower. It feels dangerous, wrong. So go home. Yeah, you'd like that, wouldn't you? You take the credit, get promoted to division head. I'm stuck, so stay. Okay, think it's working now. Nothing on screen. Do we have a signal? No. The contact said at 6 sharp. Then he's late. If he dragged us out here for nothing... Yeah? What are you gonna do to him exactly? We have a signal. Okay, here it comes. Static. There. That's not... You're not 9940 our site. You are Madras Windham and Saya Droyson of the Tex Mechanica Foundry West District? Yes. My owner has instructed me to give you the following message. I don't have time for low-life dregs like you. You disgust me, but my owner has instructed me to continue. Sit down and let the frame talk. I know your type. City big shots. You can show some listen, respect. Now listen, I got your message. The answer is no. I'm but not going to fix Crucible fights for you idiots just to let your Tex Mechanica junk look good. Do you? Now, I wouldn't put it quite like that. You think you're the first dregs dumb enough to try to buy me? Why do you people think you can buy me? Don't I have an honest face? Do I look like I need your money? The Crucible is sacred. That's what you people don't understand. Like you think it's a game now. Damn, this is the part where you start blustering at my little buddy here and telling him it's all legal down in the city. Just business, just sponsorship. So listen, I can have 10 titans crashing through your ceiling at any time I like, and you can tell them it's just business. Dan, or we can talk about how you're going to make this up to me. My little buddy's listening. Make him an offer. I think that about sums things up with how Tex acts and handles. Plus, that card's just really fun to read anyway, thinking of a frame talk like Shaq's, even if it is our site. Tex definitely seems more open with those in the city, working with Amanda Holliday to create the Chaperone, one of the only different weapons we know of that they've ever constructed. It was a unique built shotgun, since it fired slug rounds instead of buckshot, able to deliver a lot of damage at a bit further of a range. The weapon and its history are a completely different matter, but I do like that Tex works with some others around the city to honor the talent that exists therein. But that, I think, will about do it for my thoughts on the Foundries and their effect in the city or otherwise. Whenever you pick up another one of their weapons, give it a look over and get an idea for how the Foundry makes their gear. That's telling of their ideas and philosophies, because it's a mirror and representation of what they stand for. Personally, I love Veist Weapons indeed too, and I've always been a fan of AMAlon and Haki. Probably why I like FWC so much since Taken King. Think I missed something? Have any other thoughts to share? You know the place to do that, or you can leave the phrase, City Foundries, for the awesome stuff they've done for us, even if a bit shady at times. You know the other buttons to push to let me know what you thought of this episode, and I'll see you next Spacetime Guardians. Take care.